How can anybody look at something which was so desperate in our history and think about making money? I mean, yes, pay for your costs.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, we lost money,
Right.
obviously, at that time. But it was how? What headspace, other than a cruel one, would think, great, here are all these people, they're all crying, all they can do is bang a tin lid on a Thursday night. I know, I'm going to make a load of money out of them.
Yeah.
What kind of head thinks that way?
I'm so glad you put it like that, because it is, isn't it? It is just a type. It is just a character, because you can't conceive of looking at that unfolding tragedy, those pictures from Italy, thinking, well, that might happen here. I'm going to set up a company from scratch that is and I'm going to get. And then there was a lot of them doing. So was that a switch flick for you? Because you've always been.
Well, we didn't know about it, did we?
No, but in terms of where you've been in the last 6 to 12 months, as these things have emerged, was there?
Yes, that was the thing.
Absolute sense of injustice and offence.
I think I think the whole thing, and the more you only have to scratch the surface.
I know you do.
It's there in plain sight. The arrogance of it.
Unapologetic as well.
Totally.
Of course, we only made £15,000 last year, and we've made £15 million this year. That's high fives all round. Haven't we done well? It's breathtaking, right? To normal people, if that's the word.
I think it's criminal.
Yeah.
And people might say, well, there's no law against it. It's still criminal. It's morally criminal. And if I were in charge, which I never will be, and I wouldn't want to be, I would make laws to make it criminal. There are so many things, so many diktats in company law and so on, where people continually get away with asset stripping, and the tax people go after the people who've given money to the companies, taken the money out, close it down, and the poor people have to go to a compensation scheme and all sorts of things to try and get some of it back. Military veterans, I mean, the list is endless, and yet they're free. They never go to jail. There is no criminal act which has taken place. It is a criminal act.
Yes, the egregiousness of the.
It is disgusting, is what it is. And I've never really, I suppose.
But it needed the pandemic to happen for you to really feel the fury that you're articulating now.
It's not just a pandemic to happen.
But it's the horror and the opportunity.
It has changed.
It
has changed.
Right.
And having lived through, 62 I am now. Yeah. So having lived through years, to see and to work hard and to fight and to watch society change in terms of women's rights, which are big thing of mine. Obviously, children from disadvantaged backgrounds, big thing of mine. To see education becoming more equal, certainly Oxbridge level, than it ever used to be. And then for this lockdown, it's incomprehensible now how tame we all were and fearful. And people were living in fear, elderly people. I mean, my mum always lived with me.
Right.
And she died in 2017. Thank God, in a way, because if she had lived, she couldn't have coped with it at all. And I know how upset she would have been not to have been able to see people, and just so anxious she would have suffered anyway. And to know that other people were going through that, kids not being able to have their education. And I just go back to it.
No, I do.
How can you think about not just making a living?
Sure.
Like, I'm a truck driver, so I'm now going to be one of the few vehicles on the road and I'm going to do my bit. And, everyone's clapping the truck drivers quite rightly. I am going to make searingly huge amounts of greedy money. Yeah. I can't comprehend it even today. I can't comprehend it.
You've been a bit like a volcano in the last 10 minutes. You've erupted in this room. So did you erupt as the full extent of what? Because you knew Michelle Mone socially.
Well, let's talk about Michelle. Well, yeah.
Kind of. I mean,
so I'll tell you what it is. Michelle, I was introduced to by the BBC for Celebrity Apprentice, does comic relief.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. When you are if I introduce you to someone, this is my friend who's got this amazing company, and you take that at face value because you respect my judgment.
Yes,
right?
exactly that.
So when on the BBC you are introduced to this, but you take it as the truth.
Yeah.
So at that time, or a year later, I started hosting the Loose Women show on ITV. So I was in London all the time. And so they gave you an allowance for the hotel. And I thought, well, I'll top it up because I'm not staying in. Because I live in Bristol. I want a good time. So I started staying in the Dorchester. And I would top up what ITV would give me. And that's my choice.
Sure, of course.
And I was doing other work as well. And she was staying there at the same time. So you're a single woman. You're you go downstairs to the bar. You go, and that's where it sort of began. It lasted about, say, 18 months, maybe, something like that. I won't go into the detail, but I just realised, whoa, I don't want to be seen with this person. Yeah.
And then all this stuff started emerging.
Many years later. I mean, that was 2011.
So you were shocked but unsurprised then by what you discovered?
Oh, not surprised at all.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then that's just one of the examples that you've cited. We know, but most people won't know the names of the companies or the individuals that Private Eye. Richard Brooks at Private Eye has done an encyclopedic job of detailing all of it, and that's why I use the word eruption, because it is not an obvious thing for you to do. However angry you may be, you're conscious of.
I think also
it's a parapet you haven't put your head above before. Because you went often to the
there's
Deans
so many good people in this country.
Yes.
There's so many decent people. The vast majority
I think so.
are decent people.
You have to hope so. Yeah.
And they try their best. And now the amount of angst and anxiety and the kids who haven't had the education that they should have had, God bless their souls, they're all just trying their best. They're so beaten down by it. There was a shift in the psychology, because you were asking this morning about how did Johnson get away with being such a liar? How does he still, with some, not with the majority, with some, still get away with it? And I think there was a psychological shift, which was we must be obedient. And we have never had that in our psyche for the last 100 years.
Right.
So it was that. It was almost like going back to the First World War.
Yeah.
And you will be told, and it wasn't just for a week. It went on for 2 years, really.
But
every night we would see Posh Boy.
That's it, isn't
there,
it? Yeah.
Speaking in a very Churchillian manner. We had no idea what was going on behind closed doors. You had Sunak, the accountant, to his side, and then you had a scientist.
Yeah.
And it was all, stay at home, save the NHS. I can't remember with the three things, wear a mask, save the NHS. It was all about saving the NHS. Flipping heck. Yeah. And I think it went deep into our psychosis, because we were so, I was, upset. I didn't see my daughter for ages because she was in Cambridge at the time. My son lives with me. And obviously, like everybody else, you didn't see your friends, you didn't see your rest of your family, all of that. And it was such a trauma.
Yeah.
And I think it's taken us. And then it was, you allowed 4 people outside the pub if you're in Wales, but you're allowed 6 if you're across the border in England. Had nothing to do with the science after that.
No.
And I think it also affected the psychology of government.
Right.
I think they had absolute power, and we know what comes with absolute power, don't we?
We do.
Absolute corruption.
And if they'd been good, honest, decent people, this would have been fine. Or not fine necessarily, but it would have been like a war. It would have been, we are on the same side. But they were taking
we're in it together.
But we never were, because he was having a party and the rest of them were filling their pockets.
And the rest, that's just what we know.